For antiwar.com and Chaos Radio 95.9 FM in Austin, Texas, I'm Scott Horton, and you're listening to Anti-War Radio. Lieutenant Ehren Watada has refused to deploy to Iraq and was recently put on trial by the United States military, but his trial ended in a mistrial, and it is unclear what his future will be. And I'm joined on the phone by Lieutenant Ehren Watada's father, Bob. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Good morning, Scott.
It's absolutely great to have you on. I really appreciate it. And first of all, I'd like to pass on for my previous guest, James Bamford, his sentiments. He said he was greatly honored to find out that his book, A Pretext for War, was part of your son's motivation for refusing to go to Iraq once he learned the evidence in that book.
I think it was an important part. I know that my son, early on, as we discussed what was going on in Iraq, what was going on in international politics, what was going on in the United States, James Bamford's book was very instrumental.
Yes, the article I read said that one and Chain of Command by Seymour Hersh about the torture scandal were two of the instrumental ones there.
Yes, and then of course since then there's been a number of other books. There's been the Bush Agenda by Antonia Uhas, and there's been just a number of books now that have come out and detailed what is actually going on with the Bush administration, how they have lied, how they have manipulated information, and it's corruption. It's corruption at the national level.
And now your son, Ehren, is the first Army officer to refuse to deploy to Iraq.
That's
isn't that
correct.
Right?
That's correct. That's well known that he's the first officer.
And the military attempted to put him on trial, and if I understand correctly, due to some technical mistake by the prosecution, they had painted themselves into some sort of corner regarding the legality of the war, and so asked the judge for a mistrial rather than let your son be found not guilty.
Well, I think the prosecution was part of the problem in that they probably overcharged my son with the conduct on becoming an officer. There was no reason for that, but I think the judge correctly said that while they wanted to keep the war, the issues of the war out of the trial from the front door, they allowed him to come in through the back door with exactly that issue, the war itself, and the legality or illegality of the war.
Right, and now this is that weird catch-22 where the soldiers, and part of their oath in obeying the Constitution is obeying their civilian commanders, and this is an important part of our Republican form of government, that head leader of the military always wears a regular business suit and not olive green. And yet, on the other hand, they can be prosecuted for war crimes if they follow illegal orders. And I guess the position your son was in, he wanted to be able to go into court and say, but Your Honor, I would have followed the order if only it hadn't been an illegal one. And the prosecutor and the judge did not want to even let him make that case, right?
That's exactly it. The judge did not want to let him do that, but in fact what happened was that in the stipulation of facts, which the prosecution actually wrote up, that's exactly what they stipulated. They stipulated that my son was disobeying an illegal order.
Right, and it was his duty, they said, I guess they made him admit that it was his duty to deploy or somehow stipulate that he had refused to deploy, which was his duty, but that then that opened up the argument as to whether it really was his duty, and then he used that to say, no, in fact, my duty is separate. My duty is to the Constitution and to the law before it is to my commanders who give me illegal orders. That was the catch-22 that the prosecutors had worked themselves into that corner accidentally, I guess.
That's exactly the corner that they boxed themselves into. And I think the judge, after the prosecution witnesses testified exactly to that fact, that a soldier has a duty to disobey an illegal order. Was, I think at that point, the judge was very concerned that the panel would actually acquit my son. And once he realized that there was this possibility that they would acquit my son, he actually asked the prosecutor to call for a mistrial.
And now, usually double jeopardy, and I'm no lawyer, but usually double jeopardy would imply he had already been acquitted, and they're trying to prosecute him again. But I guess his lawyers are going to be making the case that the reason a mistrial was declared is because he was going to be cleared of the charges, and so therefore to attempt to prosecute him again would be double jeopardy in violation of the Fifth Amendment.
Well, yes, it's in the Constitution that you can't be losing a case and then say, hey, let's start all over again. You just cannot do that. That's part of our American system. It's part of the military system.
The very system he's trying to uphold.
Yes. And so you would hope the military will do the right thing and release him immediately. But we don't expect the military to do the right thing. So we're not sure what they're going to do, but we'll just wait.
Well, I sure wish him luck with that. Now, to be specific, there may be some George Bush supporter out there, if there are any left listening, who will say that, no, your son is not brave for standing up to the military and risking a prison term, that what he actually is a coward who's just afraid to go and fight. How would you answer that?
I think they're completely misunderstanding the entire point. My son is in fact sacrificing his future, his life, so that the soldiers can come home much sooner. I mean, he said it over and over. If his action saves one American life, it will have been worth it. He'll go to jail for that.
What a true individualist principle there. And now he's not a conscientious objector, right? He's not, your family, or you're not Quakers. And in fact, I believe I read that he even requested to be sent to Afghanistan because he thought that was at least not illegal, in the sense that America actually was attacked from people based in that country, and they refused his request to just send him to Afghanistan instead, right?
No, that's correct. He was in Korea, and remember, Korea is still technically a war zone, even with the truce there. And he was in Korea for a year, and then he said, send me anywhere else, but I won't go to Iraq because it's illegal.
So this is a man who is a soldier. He's not the kind of person who joined the military and then thought, geez, I really wish I hadn't joined the military. He wanted to be a soldier, and he wanted to go and fight America's enemies, where his government told him that they were, right?
That's exactly right. Very patriotic. He joined the military, and he and I talked about it at length, about what might happen to him and so forth, but he said he wanted to serve his country, and that's exactly why he joined the military.
Now, how did you react when he first told you that he was going to refuse to deploy and that he could get in trouble for it?
Well, of course, I didn't want that to happen to him, but I had to tell him that the final decision was his decision, and that's exactly what he did.
And now at this point, you agree with him and are glad that he made the decision that he made.
Oh yes, I'm very proud of him. He's we talked about it. I was concerned about what might happen to him, particularly that he would be incarcerated and so forth. And he said, well, that is what he has to do. He has to do the right thing, and the right thing is to stand up and say that what is going on in Iraq is terribly, terribly wrong. The killing of innocent Iraqis and the killing of American soldiers dying for nothing other than oil for the Bush regime.
Do you know this man, Jonathan Hutto, who has started this petition of active duty combat soldiers asking Congress to bring them home?
Yes, I'm very familiar with that particular petition. And I understand that there's well over 4,000 people who have signed that petition. So I think there's a clear voice coming out of the ranks of the military, and included in that petition are officers as well.
Well, 4,000 signatories.
Yeah, over that. There's another a website called Soldier Voices, and that also reflects a large number of soldiers who are saying that we just do not belong there. There is absolutely no reason for our country, for these guys to be risking their lives. And they're dying at a rate of about 3 a day now, American soldiers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really turns the war party's argument about opposing the war means undermining the troops on its head, doesn't it?
It sure does. Opposing the war means to support the troops, to get them out of there. They do not belong there. Our sons and daughters are being killed, and for no reason. As I said, it's again, it's an unfortunate part of the military-industrial complex that we have in the United States. We have virtually a military dictatorship.
It sure does seem to be going that way. The law applies to us, the law applies to your son, but certainly doesn't seem to apply to the people who are in charge of enforcing it.
The law means nothing to the Bush administration. They change the law whenever they want to, and if they don't like the law, even the Constitution, they just ignore the Constitution. They think that they are, this is part of a kingdom. The tyranny rolls on.
Now, how much time is your son facing for refusing to deploy to Iraq, sir?
Well, at the time of the court-martial, it was down to 4 years. But, of course, now some people in the military are saying that, well, we start all over again, and we're going to go back up to 8 years. And I think that's the kind of thing that, the military is expected to do. They will have a hard time admitting that they were defeated.
Wow. Did he know that he was facing as many as 8 years in prison when he refused this order?
Well, I think he knew that certainly missing a movement would be at least 2 years, and but he didn't realize that the military would try to pile it on, as you say, and this is exactly what they've done. They've tried to pile it on to try to keep him from talking to anybody. So every time he's made a speech somewhere, they pile on another year or so.
Right, they're trying to make an example out of him for the rest of them.
Right, that's exactly what they're trying to do.
And just as he's trying to set an example for the rest of them to follow.
That's correct.
And I suppose that's why that they're treating him so harshly.
They don't. Well, it's interesting that the prosecution witness said that the military officers are expected to voice their opinions and dissent if necessary. And in fact, that's exactly what my son did. Is he voiced his dissent, and but the military doesn't like it. At least the commanders at Fort Lewis don't like it.
Right, and it's so funny because I think all of us as Americans, I was born in the 70s, so it was long over by the time I was around, and when I learned the story of World War II, the crowning achievement at the end was the Nuremberg trials, where it was ruled for all eternity that every individual is responsible for his actions, and just following orders is not an excuse to commit war crimes. It was Americans who prosecuted those cases.
It's in plain English. There can be no quibbling or equivocation as to what that means.
All right, this is Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Bob Watada. His son, Ehren, is a lieutenant in the United States Army and has refused to deploy to Iraq and is facing the possibility of years in prison. And again, for those who missed the beginning of the show, there's actually a little bit of humor, I guess, in the case, in that the prosecutors wanted to make all these stipulations about what Lieutenant Watada's duties were, and they opened the door to his argument that his duty is to refuse illegal orders. And since he could have presented all sorts of evidence, I guess, to indicate that the war was illegal, including, I don't know, for example, Richard Pearl's admission that it was so, then he could have been acquitted. And he could have sent a terrible signal in the view of the military to the rest of the soldiers serving that they can just throw down their rifles and come home, that they don't have to do this. And so that's why they're going after this kid so hard. But it's at least nice to see the prosecutors ruin their own case and grant your son at least another few months of freedom. I know I've read some articles that say that experts quoted seem to think that maybe he won't even have to go back on trial because the prosecutors have made such a mess of this that basically he'll just be an even bigger and more powerful symbol if they try to do this again, that they would prefer to maybe just let sleeping dogs lie for now.
Well, we hope that that's what they'll do, but as I said, we don't expect the military to do the right thing. They're very vindictive, and they want to appear at least as though that they've done the right thing. Even the judge said, well, Lieutenant Watada was confused, therefore he's calling for a mistrial. It was not Lieutenant Watada that was confused, it was the judge that was confused.
Yeah, and the American people who were confused enough to go along with this entire fiasco. Why do you think that your son is the only officer to have stood up so far? Is he? Is that even correct?
Well, first of all, Scott, there are many officers who have spoken out. That's the interesting thing. In different places, in different venues. Secondly, there are a number of, this is what I'm told from insiders, that there are a number of officers who didn't want to go to Iraq, and they found somewhere else to put them. And so it's interesting as to why, in my son's case, what they should have done is when he said he didn't want to go to Iraq and gave those reasons, they should have just simply put him somewhere else.
Right.
And it would have been over with. That would have been the smart thing to do.
As we talked about before, he offered to go to Afghanistan. Here, send me to Afghanistan. I'll go fight in Afghanistan. And they wouldn't.
Nope.
They decided they would rather make an example out of him, and really they have, and probably in the end it's for the good. What an example has been set by the persecution of this guy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Again, they wanted to make an example of him because many other officers, the prosecution witness was asked whether or not the good order and discipline falls apart because one officer, refuses to go. And they said, oh no, we don't like it, but we can always fill in. There's no problem. And in fact, as I said earlier, is that officers have told me that sometimes there are hundreds of people who, do not deploy on the day they're supposed to deploy for one reason or another. And in fact, there's been cases in Iraq where they found out somebody was gay, and because he was a gay officer, they had yanked him out and sent him back home.
Yeah, even their translators that work here in the United States on intercepts have been fired for that.
Right.
Yeah, so, security comes first, I guess.
Yeah. So to say that the Army's going to fall apart because one person refused to go is very ridiculous.
Well, I think that's too bad, really. I would like to see the whole Army fall apart based on the example of your son. I mean, after all, it's not like any of this has to do with defending the United States.
Well, I think you may know the history of Vietnam. It was the soldiers who refused to fight that brought that war to an end. That's
right. And to be perfectly frank about it, it was the soldiers who shot their officers in the back of the head who ended that war.
That's right. It was a fragging because the soldiers realized how absolutely wrong it was for them to continue to kill the Vietnamese for absolutely no reason.
And now I'm not suggesting that anybody murder anyone. I'm just saying for historical purposes, that is the way it happened. There are thousands of cases in Vietnam Frag. And I have read that was one of the major reasons that they said, we just have to call this off.
Scott, it is murder. It is murder by any law, that when you invade a country and begin killing, plundering, raping, torturing the citizens, it's a war crime. It's a war crime. And that is exactly what is happening in Iraq today.
It's a war crime, even if it's committed by Americans. Is that right?
Even if it's committed by Americans, it's a war crime.
I think that's really the issue that probably most Americans have trouble grappling with. It's just not possible for America to be in the role of the bad guy. America is Superman, and Superman doesn't lie, and he doesn't cheat or steal, or certainly doesn't murder people. And so a war crime by definition is something that is done by a foreigner, not by an American.
Well, that's what we think, but I think everybody has to understand, come to grips with the fact that we have a president that is corrupt and has no problem with killing innocent mothers, killing innocent babies, innocent men, and that's what's happening. That's what we have to come to grips with. Is that that's what America is doing, and it's people like my son who are standing up and saying that is very, very wrong. It's even flies in the face of our Constitution.
Right, and here we are on the eve of another war, and perhaps inspired by your son's example, there are more and more people coming forward. Unfortunately, they're not stealing documents and making them public, as Dan Ellsberg complains, but there are more and more people coming forward and speaking out in an attempt to stop the next war. I think probably people who feel bad that they didn't do enough to stop the last one. Hillary Mann, a former member of the National Security Council, told Newsweek and CNN that she believes that the policy is to keep slapping Iran until they hit us first, which that's my words, not hers, but basically to deliberately provoke Iran into attacking us. So that's really strong language to come from someone who was on Bush's National Security Council. Hopefully we'll see more people coming out in following your son's lead and saying enough is enough. Yeah, stopping a war is more important than me.
That's exactly what the Bush administration do. They're trying to provoke Iran so they can have some pretext. It was just like in Vietnam. There was no pretext, so they said that 12 fishing sampans attacked the U.S. fleet 12 miles out in the ocean. That was how ridiculous it was.
Sure does
in Iraq,
sound silly.
You have the president saying that, well, they have weapons of mass destruction. We know they have weapons of mass destruction, so let's go get them. These lies are all constructed simply to benefit the corporate interests and the war profiteers, and nothing more.
Well, sir, on behalf of antiwar.com and I think probably tens, if not more than 100 million Americans, I'd like to thank you and pass on our thanks to your son, who you did such a good job raising, for serving as such a fine example of people willing to sacrifice their own personal interest, not to necessarily, serve what the state defines as the greater good, but to do what they feel is the right thing to save human lives. And I want to pass on that thanks and hope that you pass it on to your son for me.
Well, thank you. And as one last thought, what my son is saying is all of us as Americans should stand up and, in some way or another register our protest as to what is going on in Iraq. The plunder, the rape, the torture, the murder, it's going on every single day, and it's got to stop.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, that's Bob Watada. His son, Lieutenant Ehren Watada, is facing a possible prison term for refusing to deploy to Iraq. Thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Scott.